From the gut punch opening to the slow unraveling of truth, All Her Fault is like a thriller built on instinct rather than plot mechanics. And I want to get into how Minkie Spiro made something this emotionally precise feel so relentlessly tense. Minkie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rob. Lovely to see you.
So, when you first read the novel and then spoke to creator Megan Gallagher, what was the precise yes moment for you, the thing that you could uniquely bring to All Her Fault as director and executive producer?
Well, there's a lot of things to say, but I would say that it's rare when you find a show that has this delicious propulsive engine, but also keeps you guessing until the very last moments. And the truth is, often in novels and shows, you can kind of see where it's going towards the end. But when I read this novel, I was completely blindsided by the final twist. But what makes this story particularly unique for me is that it had substance. And as a working mother, to be able to make a show that subtly addresses some really deep-rooted social discrepancies that have gone unaddressed for decades, and all this within the skin of a thriller, was the ultimate yes factor. And I like the fact that I'm known for guiding actors through high pressure and emotional stresses, but I knew this one was going to be extra challenging, so I was excited to think about what I could bring to it. And how I could masterfully bring this to light. And then lastly, I think I always look for the auspices in which this show is being made. And obviously I had this working relationships and a very special one with Carnival Films and Nigel March and Gareth Neame, who I've worked with before on Downton Abbey, quite a few seasons of that. So there was a shorthand that I knew was, I was going to be, they were going to just let me do my thing. And then, when I met Megan, I just knew we were going to have this fantastic team.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, you said your connection to the project started with the ending, that sense of being blindsided in the best way. And I've got to tell you, when I was watching this show, and you probably know this because I was sending you a couple of private messages saying, Minkie, this show's killing me. My God, where is it going? And then when you're adapting something built around a late game like detonation, how do you design the season so that the mystery feels fair on rewatch without tipping your hand too early with the audience?
Yeah, that's a tough one. But I mean, when I build or approach any new series, I look at the overall arc of a show before I even start to dissect tone, look, feel, casting, locations. And by doing so, I'm addressing all of those questions that you've been talking about. But with this particular show, Megan, Nigel, and I discuss how to avoid that trap of that last episode suddenly unraveling and unpacking everything. So it was about not just leaving all the answers to the end. So it was about being really careful about when to unpack twists and turns so that there is this element of being blindsided at the end, but it doesn't all happen in episode 8. And, episode 7 was very specific. It was a standalone that really unpacked Carrie's backstory, which, as you know, really helps with the emotional impact and the reveal at the end. And I think once you understand Carrie's backstory, it makes the whole journey even more chilling. I mean, there's lots of things about color and, the palette and choices of camera work that we could go into and locations. But that maybe we can delve in later.
Yeah, absolutely. All Her Fault, it punched me in the face from the get-go because the doorbell scene is basically a short, sharp horror film about a parent's brain misfiring in real time. And I put myself in the character played by Sarah Snook in her shoes and Jake Lacey's character. Talk us through your approach to staging that opening so that it reads as confusion first, then dread, then full body panic.
Wow. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. That opening is everything for me. So hopefully it's a cinematic dive into a parent's worst nightmare, which hopefully you confirmed there. And I wanted it to feel like a masterclass in psychological dread. I mean, obviously that puts a lot of pressure on myself and the cast. And directing Snook during her character's most intense period of trauma, the initial trauma was a treat because she delivered it with bells on. And hopefully we successfully transition, albeit rapidly, from like everyday cheeriness to the utter anguish of motherhood and loss. So for me, this moment, these first 5 minutes of the show and establishing the tone and the vision for this suburban nightmare was going to be the make or break of the show and the series itself. And I needed to make it as visceral and as painful as possible, which hopefully you felt. And forcing the audience to sit like you did in this discomfort and feel that raw, unpolished pain. And if I could hook the audience in then and make them care, but also feel that guttural dread, then I knew we were going to be in a strong place. And for all intents and purposes, Sarah Snook's character is living through many shades of trauma throughout the entire show. So the challenge has always been for me is how do you give trauma a different feel, all the different colors and shades without, and an ebb and flow without it feeling repetitive and or one note. And Snook and I work really close together to navigate this and the show's complex psychological trauma. And I mean, she's the real deal, I mean, no questions, and a true craftswoman. And it was like an absolute joy to go on this journey with her.
You really kind of hit the jackpot with her because Emmy winning, Tony winning, legend Aussie actor just knocks it out of the park in this. Like, as far as I'm concerned, she should have the Emmy wrapped up already, but I don't want to jinx it. Okay, so
Amen,
let's
amen.
come on. Like, seriously, she's so good. So, look, the thing that really hit me as well, and you alluded to this earlier, is that the show threads this social commentary around working mums and who gets blamed. I even found myself judging for a little bit, then had to check myself. How deliberate were you and Megan about embedding that in the blocking, reaction shots, and who you choose to linger on?
I mean, I think the fact that both Megan and I are working mums was very telling, and hopefully the end result shows just how much we wanted to shine a light on this. It's fascinating and rewarding to learn that after the show came out, just how many women felt seen. And hearing and reading in the commentaries and the reviews and social media, that was kind of one of the biggest gifts for me. But in terms of social commentary, I mean, the last thing we wanted to do was hit people over the head with it and say, oh, woe is me and all men are bad. But instead illustrate it in a much more subtle way through observational, almost throwaway details. So when you ask about lingering, I think one good example is when Jenny comes home and she's had this awful day and it's been a long day, and she comes home and Richie's there and he's complaining about putting their son to bed, and then just grabs his sandwich and leaves the kitchen, and she just stares at this countertop and the crumbs and the dirty breadboard and the knife still in the mayo and all things that are so revealing about their dynamic at home. And so but I wanted to do it in a way that was not throwaway, but if you blink, you miss it, because I didn't want to be, oh, worthy is me. But I think, what was also interesting was reaction shots and having fun with it, because I wanted to play with the audience, especially those that were going to come back for a second viewing. So a moment that was a reaction shot that felt very innocuous in episode, like in your first viewing, when you watched it again, I would also do another take. And when I'm in the edit, think about, do I want to push a little bit further, which for first viewers, they won't notice it. But when you come back and you watch it again, you'll read into that look so much more deeply. So reaction shots as well, I played with on the floor.
Yeah, there's like a little eye roll or a little side eye, and it really
Yeah.
makes such an impact. And I've got to say, that moment that you just talked about really pissed Paula off, my wife. Paula. She's like, "Oh God, typical." And then, of course, we moved on. So just talk about process. You directed the first four episodes, then Kate Dennis takes the last four. What talk us through the handoff? What did you want to lock in as the show's visual grammar and tonal rules in your half, so that the back half could escalate without feeling like a completely new series?
That's such a great question. I think most people don't really understand how critical that is. I mean, it's always difficult when you set up a show, right? You're knowing that at a certain point you're going to have to hand that baton over. So communication and dialogue is paramount. And obviously when you set up a show, you're looking at the entire arc of the show, not just the first four episodes, to make sure that the visual arc and the design of it works for the entirety of the show and actually has payoff. So I always put together this really detailed lookbook So when I do the handover with the directors, they're fully equipped. And with Kate, I also had really long conversations about everything from cast and how they like to work and how best they take notes, but also obviously about the visual grammar that I was setting up for the show and the grammar, the camera grammar and the color palette, so that she was fully armed and aware and able to kind of take us successfully to the finishing line. So, for example, I think I mentioned, but during prep, I was obsessed about finding this visual metaphor, this visual way in which I could illustrate the dynamic in the marriage and the shift in it. So, but I wanted it to be subtle, like, and for the audiences ultimately to question perceptions and what's truly going on. But because the performances were delicate and grounded, I didn't want to rely on like a heavy wash of color timing or anything as crude as that. So I investigated with the production designer, a guy called Rob Harris, different shades of blues and teals, and which of these colors could respond most actively to light. And then I worked with Sergio Delgado, who's the DP, to take this to the next level. And so what I wanted is I wanted the Irvine house to begin as this cocoon, this sanctuary, this warm, safe place for the Irvines. But as the secrets and lies unfold, I wanted the home to become cold and almost like this alienating cage for Marissa. And so with this particular blue, what I found was that when you throw warm color temperatures onto it, it does have a warmth to it. But as soon as you throw cooler light on it, it feels alienating, and it serviced my desire to have Marissa feel like she was in this cage. So I dug deeply in with Kate and her DP Earl so that they were essentially on top of all these visual building blocks so that they could honor them. And, another piece of the visual grammar was my choice of lenses. And in a way, I chose particular ones for Sarah so that she would feel even more isolated and alienated and lost, depending on what focal plane I was on. And then the last thing that was particularly specific was, as soon as Milo is confirmed as disappearing, all the shots of the Irvine family, so Peter, Marissa, and the siblings, was done on a very subtle handheld camera. And then all the reverses were done in studio mode with the detectives or basically anybody else. But as soon as Milo returns and is safe at home, handheld no longer exists. You can do it on Steadicam, but I didn't want to use handheld after that. I wanted the psychological trauma of what Marissa was about to go through, that the audience was also about to go through, wasn't cliched by going handheld. So those were the kind of things that
Wow.
I was very clear with Kate Dennis, so that it married and there was a full arc to the show.
It's amazing how these little tricks that we as the audience do not pick up on straight away, it's so subliminal, but it really, really impacts the storytelling. It really
Oh,
impacts the way that it resonates.
I'm
It's
so glad to
incredible.
hear that.
Absolutely. So, look, filming in Victoria, Melbourne, while doubling for Chicago is a big swing. It could have gone completely pear-shaped, but it's a fascinating logistical and aesthetic puzzle that you have to get through. How did the Australian crew base and these locations contribute to the show's success?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, originally we were meant to shoot in Toronto, but as soon as Snook came on board, we pivoted to Melbourne. And nowadays, with the advancement of VFX, it's so much easier to kind of address those geographical discrepancies. And obviously, I made sure that Chicago was top loaded in the first two episodes. So when I went on the scout, I was very top heavy. I was just like, right, we're using that bridge, we're using the beam. I was unashamedly throwing all the cliches at it, but it sort of works because it
Yeah.
makes you completely believe you're in Chicago. And the other thing that was key to me was to make sure it didn't feel like B-roll. So it was really imperative to me that I brought Dakota with me, who plays Jenny, so that I could do key scenes in the opening of her walking in that space. What else? And so like when I went on the scout to Chicago, I did then, have a long discussion with Megan about, can we relocate this scene onto the bridge, and can we do this here so that I can, fully celebrate Chicago. But as far as shooting in Australia, it is truly one of the most enjoyable places to work with. The crews are spectacular. I mean, top of their game, and such wonderful people with it. And also I got to work with some techniques which I'd never worked with before. So, for example, we built the interior of the Irvine house on the biggest sound volume stage in the Southern Hemisphere, which was new to me. So basically, all outside the Irvine build were plate shots of Chicago and Lake Michigan. And so, for somebody who loves Golden Hour, I was finally able to do a 3-page scene in Golden Hour because I could just re-loop the Golden Hour. Normally you've got half an hour to get a scene in, so you're lucky if you get a fifth of a page in Golden Hour. But I got some nice chunky scenes. So yeah, I am
Mm.
like Australia all the way.
Yes, I love to hear that. And the beauty of technology, see what you can create when you can lean on the tech wizards. Let's talk about the actors because I feel like that you really can't talk about All Her Fault without talking about this incredible cast, obviously led by Sarah Snook. She has to live in this sustained trauma while being readable, specific, moment to moment, and perfectly calibrated. And she does. This is why she keeps getting nominated for awards for this performance. What do you most value about her as number one on the call sheet? And what did she do on this set that raised the bar for everybody else?
Wow. I mean, like I say, she's the real deal. Um, but it's interesting because, as a director, one of your roles is to basically be a performance architect, but you also have to know when to step away. And what I love about Sarah's, she's able to say so much with ultimately so little. Like there's this beautiful stillness, but there is so much going on in her eyes. Or it could just be a flicker in her eyes. It tells me so much, and it's interesting. But when I work with new actors in the industry, they busy themselves. They get really like they think more is more, and my biggest note often to them is less is more, and believe in yourself and believe in that stillness and what's being said in that stillness. And yeah, I think for me, working with Sarah to navigate this psychological complexity that she plays within this show was incredibly rewarding. And there were some scenes where they were emotionally so intense, and we'd have these very detailed conversations about them. And then, you'd call action, but actually in the scene, sometimes there isn't enough of a ramp to get to that place. And so I remember Sarah and I called cut, and we went off to one side and we talked about it. And I said, look, we know what we need. We've talked about it. You know what you're doing. Just, we've got all the cameras set up. Just go and sit in that space and get to the place you need to get to. And then just give me a nod, just give me an eye flick, and I'll turn the cameras over. And she's like, no, 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 but because as an exec producer, she also had that hat on her head saying, but we've got to make the day. I said, don't worry, we'll make the day. That you don't need to worry about that. I can assure you we're going to make the day, but you need to get into the right headspace to be able to deliver what you're paid here to do, amongst other things. So that was sometimes one way to calibrate a scene. And the other thing that I often did, which is kind of interesting, is that if we were in this very intense, complex scene, and I didn't want to disrupt where, let's say, Sarah's, but it could have been another actor's mindset, I would actually give a note to her scene partner. Because by giving a note to her scene partner about a specific moment that I was trying to recalibrate or dial up or down in, let's say, Snook's, Marissa's character, by the scene partner doing something different, it changes the energy in her reaction because she's always present in the scene. So that's another technique that I use sometimes. Yeah.
Fascinating. Look, I got to talk about Jake Lacey because he's one of my favorite actors. You know, he started off playing a lot of boyfriends and like the friendly, benign kind of vanilla guy. Then he pivoted into playing a lot of villains. So he's cast in this, and I think to myself, I wonder which side of of Jake Lacey we're going to see. He has a brutally difficult assignment on this show because he's playing a man who might be hiding something. We slowly start to get the reveals. How do you calibrate Jake's performance or help him calibrate so that we see that gradual devolution across the season, especially in scenes where a single micro choice could spoil the suspense?
It's so funny. I worked with Jake on Fosse Verdon, so I knew Jake, and he was somebody I was very keen to look at for this role. Because I knew that he'd bring so much talent and layers to this. But it was funny because when he arrived in Melbourne and he came into my office and we started talking about the character, I suddenly realized he has no idea what goes on. He'd only read the first two episodes, so I said, "Do you want me to reveal what goes on?" He's like, "Yeah, sure." And I gave him the arc, and he was just like jaw on the floor. He couldn't believe it. He said, "Minkie, I knew this was a gift of a job to, you and I to reconnect, but like this is the juiciest role I've ever had to do." And he just was phenomenal. It was interesting because he loves being directed. He loves having notes. I would often say to him things like, "Don't tell me what you're feeling. Don't show me what you're feeling." Just, or like we would play with, okay, what would we do if the audience are watching this for a second time? So we had a lot of fun. But the other thing I just love to say about Jake, he was the class clown. It's like whenever we did really, really difficult, complex scenes, I'd call cut and suddenly he'd be out with a joke or like his lexicon of like Trivial Pursuit, film knowledge. I mean, he was truly a delight on set. Yeah.
Yeah, not only do I love him as an actor, but I just find him to be such a delight to talk to. He really is a true gentleman, and very funny. But I tell you who my favorite character actually was, and that was Jim Alcaraz, the detective, played by Michael Pena. Such an underrated actor, by the way. But he is the moral pressure valve for the series, as far as I'm concerned. What were your conversations like with Michael about playing a cop whose ethical lines keep getting tested while still holding the audience trust? Because we have to root for somebody, and I feel like he was one of those people.
I mean, first of all, hats off to Pena. I mean, he's an incredible actor and a beautiful human. And it's interesting. He's played cops before, but what made this special for him was that he was going to be having a child with special needs. And he got super excited about that. And Penny and I invested a ton of time with Orlando, who plays Sam, who does have special needs. And, we'd hang with him at the weekends because, what's important to me is that Orlando builds up a relationship with Penny and I so that when he comes on set, he can put his best foot forward. Even for an able-bodied person, set is quite an intimidating, full-on place. So imagine for Orlando, it's a completely new world for him. He'd never done this before. So we wanted to support his journey in any which way we could. And Michael was truly, truly exceptional with him. But I think also what's interesting is that, we do cast shade on many of our male husbands and their contributions to the household. So it was really important to Megan and I that we also showed the other side of it, that there are those who do carry the heavy weight or can juggle an exceptionally challenging home life and still pull their weight both at work and at home. And so I think it was an even more interesting moral question for Pena, for Alcaraz to deal with, when the truth is all of us as good parents would do whatever it takes and whatever is needed to give our children the best start in life. So I thought it was a really interesting place for Alcaraz to challenge his moral compass.
Yeah, maybe it was a self-serving thing, but I really related to the character because I just felt like he does the work. He's a genuine guy. He's pulling his weight, but he also is super empathetic, and yeah, it's an incredible performance. Okay, so the show itself has been huge, both critically and commercially. Critics, by and large, love it, and it became Peacock's biggest series launch ever. So when a project connects at that scale, what do you think audiences are responding to most? The mechanics of the mystery or the emotional reality underneath it?
Hmm. I mean, I think it's. I think it's a combo of both. I mean, who doesn't respond to a deliciously twisty thriller and unexpected outcome? But I think people felt blindsided in a good way, and that structurally, the fact that we did these two standalone episodes, one with Alcaraz's and his son's backstory, and one with Carrie's, helped support the thriller, but also respect this human story and this deep dive into humanity and so allowing those paths to cross and all the complications, and so that you deliver this emotional reality that becomes even more gratifying once you understand where this thriller goes. And I think, you know, it was such a it was such a big thing for me that women felt seen, because this story doesn't normally shine light on women in this way. And the other thing is that it would have been so easy for this story to have like taken two female characters and their friendship to rub up against each other, but actually they become each other's backbone and spine and strength to get through this difficult journey together. And I thought that was kind of beautiful as well. And maybe that's what people responded to. I don't know.
100%. Because I tell you what, I would have been really disappointed if those two women ended up being kind of like oppositional or
Yeah.
again. I wanted them to be friends. I wanted them to support, and they did. And I felt that to be really, really
Oh.
satisfying storytelling. So you've been doing a run of Q&As and panels, and you're about to head back to LA to accept the Gracie Award for the show. Congratulations. Um, what has it been like to sit with audiences though and feel how they're processing the story, especially something that might hit a raw nerve?
I mean, look, what we do, what you do, what I do, what we all do in the entertainment industry is tough. I mean, it's long hours, it's high stress. I mean, although I wouldn't want to do anything else, and I don't feel like it's work. I wake up every day feeling like I'm doing what I love. So there's no criticism
No
there.
complaints.
No
Yeah, no
complaints. Thank
complaints.
you.
No
But
complaints.
but you know, it has taken its toll, if I'm being brutally honest, in how much I've been present sometimes at home with my girls. And you know, so weirdly, making a show that shines a light on this has been kind of rewarding, because it's brought me full circle from very early on in my career. After becoming a mum, I lost two jobs because the producers at the time when I was doing the interview didn't realize I had two young children. And then when they heard I had two young children, they took the job away from me. So to be in this situation now where I'm on these panels and people are really responding beautifully to it, just makes just gives me a happy ending to that storyline in my life.
Yeah, it's a nice closing of that circle. I like that. So, final question. Looking back now, what's the single scene or sequence or craft choice that you're proudest of in All Her Fault? And how has making the show changed you as a director going into whatever comes next?
I mean, although it's a tough one, and probably my answer is going to be cliched, it's the opening scene.
You know, I
There's
mean,
so,
really?
I mean, there's so much pressure on a pilot director to get that right. You've got to hit the ground running, and you either grab the audience and take them with you, or you fall flat on your face. And thank goodness it was the former. And and I mean, I'm in the middle of Post on Five Star Weekend, which is actually another Peacock show that drops on 9th of July. Um,
Check it out.
I'm really excited about it. It's got Jennifer Garner, Chloe Sevigny, Regina Hall, Gemma Chan, and Darcy Carden, and Timothy Oliphant. It's an
Wow.
amazing cast, and it's all about, you know, it's about exploring and going into relationships and difficult conversations amongst these women, but couching it in an entertaining framework. So maybe I'm finding pleasure in that space right now.
Yeah, maybe that's the answer. You know what, Mickey? It's rare to see a show that works both as a gripping mystery and as a study of pressure and guilt and perception. All Her Fault does both, and it
Oh,
really stays with you. Thank you so much for the conversation today.
thank you. Thank you, Rob.